PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I'm Dave, and in this video I'm doing something a little bit different. I recently had a chance to sit down and have a good long chat with John Davidson from the Heavy Repping Plectrum blog, talking all about these things, the much overlooked but very essential Plectrum. So you're more than welcome to sit in and listen on the conversation and see what we got to talk about. Okay, so I'm joined today, first time I've done one of these collaborative things, with John Davidson from the Heavy Repping Plectrum blog. So, hi John, how you doing?
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, it's good.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining this. So I started my YouTube channel, really it was kind of a vehicle. I do the PhatPhish software. I'm a teacher, is sort of my background with guitar. I wrote this piece of software called PhatPhish to show people how to play scales and all the patterns on the neck. Started the YouTube channel kind of to do tutorials for that, and that snowballed into, well, just tutorials about music theory and playing guitar generally. And then I discovered people quite liked it if I did gear reviews. I wanted to mix it up a little bit, and there's a lot of interest in gear. And I thought next thing I want to try and just do some collaborative stuff, so I thought have a chat with you today. So what's I know you've done like the full history of the rep video on your YouTube channel, but what's the Cliff's Notes edition of your backstory?
So the chat with the rep is I got into picks a few years ago, seriously, and I'd always been interested in them. But I worked in guitar shops most of my life in Glasgow, Exeter and London. I'm currently working at Manson's Guitars here in Exeter, but I did 5 years on Denmark Street as well. And during my time there I got really into, I started off playing like Jazz Altex XLs and that sort of thing, but then I got hold of some Gravity picks and then some V-Picks stuff. And when I was in New Zealand for a little bit, and while I was over there I got my hands on Dragon's Heart, and they were the first like boutique picks I ever got my hands on. And I started doing little micro reviews on Instagram. I never really used Instagram before, and I got a bit of feedback from people. I mean, the heavy repping wasn't even a thing then. I was just nobody at all. But I saw that some people were interested in it, and I'd always been interested in it. And then I got my hands on more and more stuff and started to discover how big the community was. And so I've been doing the YouTube side of it and the writing side of it for just over a year. It was Boxing Day 2018 was the first broadcast. So it's been a while, but it's just celebrating this thing that nearly all guitarists use and nobody really thinks about.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I've talked to like luthiers and that, and they say like getting the fretwork's really important because that's your left hand's or your fretting hand's interface with the guitar. And guitarists have all this obsession with gear, and before I was on here, I was just watching an old TPS show. People are into pedals, people are into amps. What's happening with your picking hand? That is the interface. That's 50% of your interface to the guitar. But nobody seems to focus on that the way that they do on the other elements. Why is that? Why does it get overlooked?
I've thought about this. I did a video a wee while ago called "Picks, Why Should You Care?" and that's a totally valid reason. And in all honesty, that's the biggest question I get asked. Apart from what is that when you pull out something, like this, which is quite a thick old job. But the reason why guitarists don't think about it is the same reason guitarists never think about things like cables or the quality of your patch leads or why your power supply is important, that sort of thing. Because it's not sexy and it's not fun. Everybody gets into pedals, everybody gets into guitars because you can rave about a paint job or you can rave about a vintage aspect of it or something like that. And I get this in all the shops I've worked in where somebody will have no problem at all, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this. I'm not calling anybody out for it, but it is the simple fact that a lot of people have no problem spending $1,000, $2,000 even on a guitar, and then buying their cables for $10. Because if it's something that if your players aren't up in your face going, I'm using these cables or I'm using this, then why would you think about it? I think in all honesty, it's a little bit like, I put picks a little bit like where pedals were about 8 years ago, in the sense that back then, it was when I was growing up in the 90s and gigging in Glasgow, it was very common for people to have a board full of Boss gear, and then they'd have for their modulation and delay and what have you, and then they'd have a boutique overdrive because that's where the money went. Now it's totally normal for people to have all boutique boards with nothing normal, nothing off the peg, and stuff like your Earthquaker, Walrus, all that sort of jazz. That's become the norm. All the Strymon gears become totally normal. But there was a period where that had to come into the mainstream. It had to be accepted as the mainstream. And Pix is kind of like that. It's only been in the last 5 years that anyone started asking questions, and it's because of the rise in popularity of things like tech metal and all the modern guys playing headless guitars and fan frets and all that, because they're a generation that's not steeped in the same it needs to be like this traditionalism of my generation. And while it's not a better or worse thing, it's just the natural progression of things. Like, it would have been completely, people laughed you down the street back in the early, sort of mid 90s and early 2000s, when you're like, I'm going to take my pod out, I'm going to take my Line 6 pod out and go straight into the desk, and people will go and wave their finger at you. And now it's totally normal for touring bands, to take Kempers out instead of amps, or to take stuff like the Helix or a Fractal system, and the principle is the same. So we've got a different attitude now, but I do think it's still in its ascent, but the rep is trying to change that, of course.
Yeah, because I've noticed you said something on, I think it was an Instagram story the other day, that you're noticing that every time you put a review out, one or two more people are finding that, and the word's spreading, and you're seeing the view counts going up. So there is an interest there, and it's growing, which I guess is good.
I think it's partly because, and I said this to people a lot in work, in different places. The more I've become aware of it, because I'm learning stuff all the time. I'm not like, there's guys out in the field who know way more stuff than I do. Like Will Hoover, who's the big, he wrote the book on Pix, quite literally, this book, which is not, it's out of print, but this is the book. If you want to know anything about the origin of it, of the guitar picks anyway, not going back to the stuff in ancient times like the picks for the oud and the shamisen and all that sort of thing, but he's the boy. If you actually show somebody in real life, and it doesn't have to be, I'm not a snob with this, I genuinely don't think that's the right way of looking at it. It's like being a snob with guitars, where you say, this guitar has no place. It's what you say. If somebody says, oh, get it all the time, people come in and say, oh, Squire's just Fender's cheap brand. Be that as it may, that's still somebody's gateway into the trade. That might be a guitar that somebody bonds with for 10 or 15 years. So if you put something like a totally ordinary Dunlop like that against something like this, which is a Purple Plectrum's rug, or Taylor Thermix Ultra, and these are just store-bought things. These aren't fancy things, but the difference in tone of one chord between just these two picks is gigantic. It might not be for you, but that's not the point of the exercise. So it's the same thing with every pedal company building a tube screamer or anything like that. There's room for it.
Yeah, because you said that makes a difference in tone. I don't want to get into the whole tone wood debate on electrics, because that's a whole rabbit hole. But when you talk about tone, are you meaning tone on an electric guitar? The way that pick interacts with the strings will affect the amplified tone. Yeah,
absolutely. All I would say for anybody watching at home, the easiest test that you can do is electric or acoustic. Most straightforward, honest to God, store-bought thing. Get a 1/2 mil Dunlop. Doesn't matter if it's nylon or Tortex. Get a 1/2 mil Dunlop and play it against a 1 mil. And see if you can't feel. It's the same shape, it's the same material, it's the same beveling. See if you can't feel a difference in the balance of the sound, the expression of it, the bass. And one thing that you will notice is if you play a thin pick, especially something under, say, like 0.73 of a mil, which is totally normal, the Dunlop Yellow, most widely used pick in the universe. If you take one of those and you play as hard as you physically can, like rattle that thing, properly go for it, there's a ceiling. There's a point at which no matter how hard you play, you're not going to get any more power out of the instrument than that. And one thing that I will say, because I don't use anything, and this is not some snob thing, it's a statement of fact, I don't use anything really under about 3mm now. The reason being, I've had a lot of problems with my wrists, especially my right hand. I had a terrible problem with, I've got double jointed thumbs. So when I was younger, I was playing, I'd have the pick round like that and play that way. And I see a lot of guys still doing that now, but if you're holding it, I had to force myself to play the right way around. And the key thing is, using a thicker plectrum doesn't mean that you have to play as hard. Because if you're playing too hard, it just sounds like you're thrashing it. Thicker plectrum, it's the same thing as running your amp louder or using less gain at a higher volume. You preserve things. You don't have to hit it as hard. You don't have to dig into like take your 0.71 little pink thing, which is what I used to use, the 500 series, and bash the hell out of everything, because you're not going to get any more out of it. Run the PA louder, you don't have to sing as hard. Doesn't mean you're using all that extra power, but it gives you somewhere to go,
Because I was looking back at a YouTube video I did 2 or 3 years ago now, and basically I just went to the local music store, went along the display cabinet, one of those, and just did a bit of a shootout video, probably about 15, 20 different picks. And I mean, since I did that, I've experimented a bit more. I've got some timber tones there, like horn, bone, carbon fibre and that. But that first early pick shootout that I did, with 1 or 2 exceptions, these were just humble, these were pieces of plastic about the size of your Tortex type thing. But they all did have a different feel. They had, like you say, the different dynamics as you're hitting the string, the amount of give that they've got or haven't got. And it comes like a feedback loop. The way your picks interacting, you start to play different, and this, I think, it becomes like the whole tones in the fingers thing. That if you get the right pick, it helps your sound just because of the way you interact with the guitar.
Yeah, it's a little bit like to use the most appropriate analogy I can think of with this. Well, there's 2 to make it super simple. In the simplest sense, I would, if you're thinking picks, whatever, think about it from a drummer's perspective. So say you're sitting down at a drum kit and you normally play, you're going and you're playing with aluminium sticks, right? Which is not unheard of. Or you're playing with 5Bs, or you're playing with something really heavy, right? And you're giving it ba-bum, ba-kak, ba-bum, ba-kak, like that. You, same drummer, same kit, same sticks, then you got to go and do a quiet jazz gig. Or you just got to do your set but quieter. You take the same sticks. It's not appropriate. You go to rods or you use brushes or something like that. Whenever I talk to guitarists or drummers who also play guitar, they totally get this. Like, they look at it and say, well, yeah, of course. Why would you not do that? It makes total sense. The other thing I would say is that a big part of it is, if I talk about, okay, the way I would explain this from a guitarist's perspective is that it's about synergy with your gear, right? So you can string with anything. You can string with 9s in standard tuning, you can string with 8s in standard tuning, whatever. Whether you are into those gauges or not, those gauges will still work. They will still perform in that tuning, and that's fine. However, if you like to have a heavier gauge of string, or you like to have a particular drive or a particular amp, which we all do, then even though you could do your gear, you could use any sort of gear to make the music you want to do, which you can, I mean, it stands to reason. Having your specific things lets you give a better performance. It lets you perform your music with greater confidence and sincerity. So I always liken it to the overdrive thing. I've collected stupid numbers of overdrives over the years. That's just been my thing. And which I know is a lot of guitarists' things, so that's not weird. But
I'm not here to judge.
yeah, but the key thing with that is that when I put my foot down and I step on my drive, I know exactly how it's going to behave, and that takes that element out of my performance. If anything, instead of concerning myself about how it sounds, I look forward to it. The pick is exactly the same thing. I know when I pick up some of my more well-worn items like that. That's a Crow's Customs Tago XL, a Claw XL made from Tago. Sorry. I know when I pick this up exactly how it's going to feel, how I can go through the strings, what tones I'm going to be able to get access to, what tones I'm not going to be able to get access to. And I think it's a very exciting time to be a guitarist, because, or well, any musician really, but particularly guitar, because back in the old days, by old days I mean like 20 years ago, you had to buy a guitar of a certain type, your Les Paul, your SG, Strat, 335, whatever. You then had to make it fit the style of music that you were trying to do. Right? But now, if you say, I want to play a microtonal fan fret 8-string with purely active pickups, and I'm only going to play with high gain, that's a thing.
Yeah.
You can specifically choose exactly how you want to say what you're trying to say, and all of that begins with picks. It's the instant you hit the string. That's why it's so important, and that's why, because of that attitude, that's why people aren't afraid to try going boutique with that anymore. Plus, I will say that boutique guys tend to make from much harder materials, and so the picks last longer. So instead of you buying a bag of nylons and ripping through one a gig, and there's plenty of guys that do that, you might spend a tenner, 15, 20 quid on a pick, and it'll last you for, in the cases of things like Stone or UHMWPE, it might last you for 5 or 10 years. The one Plectrum, which brings us on to a whole thing about sustainability, but I'm not going to get into that. Tempting though it is.
Yeah, because I've got a friend. I've got quite a light touch when I play, but a friend of mine, he really digs in, and he used to play Dunlop Big Stubbies, and I thought, oh yeah, I can understand why. It's basically the stuff they make bulletproof glass from. But he could break a Plectrum in the course of a gig, not on particularly heavy strings, but just by digging in that plastic against metal, it just ate it away.
Yeah. It's funny the materials that people use for picks, and how that's changed over the years. Because back in the old days, like we're talking the early 20th century here, and by that I mean like 1900, and going into the 1910s. It was very common for, well, we're talking in the turtle and tortoise shell era. Then jazz players, particularly tortoiseshell. That's the thing. I've had the opportunity to play with that, and it's kind of nasty, because it is actually a bit of a tortoise. But it gives a particular sound, and that's the whole thing with Tortex that Jim Dunlop pioneered, which got standardised in '81. The whole idea behind that was to replace that. But before that, it was celluloid standardised in the 1920s by D'Andrea, and celluloid was used because it was the first commercially available plastic, and it was cheap, and you could make it into anything, and people weren't thinking. I mean, this is when the Plectrum as we know it today was categorically in its infancy. But now it's just like, it's endless. I mean, there's picks in here from your normal stuff like the stuff you'd see in the shop, Delrin, nylon, acrylic, Ultex. Those are pretty common. You'll see those in just about any guitar shop you're going to. Then there's celluloid gels, which I'm not a big fan of, but that's by the by. Acrylic is when you start to get into the sort of higher planes. Polycarbonate also you get in some picks. Companies like Pickboy and Swiss Picks do a big range in that. Acetal, and then it gets into the more boutique end of things, which is like PSU, Kerinite, Stone, UHMWPE, Bone Picks. There's loads of guys doing wood again for some reason. Wood's very good in recording terms. I wouldn't gig it necessarily, just because wood does wear quicker than other materials, but there's things like the material that Gibson use for their fingerboards, like Richlight. I've got a couple of Richlight picks. The sound is great off of those. They also don't have as much string noise, as long as they're not lacquered. Your Timbertone stuff, they tend to go in for lacquering quite a bit, which does contribute to chirping, but they're very, very well made. So, you know, all these things, there's no wrong answer. I have found that there are materials that don't work quite as well as others, but that doesn't mean that nobody should use them, because somebody somewhere is going, I found my thing, and that's the important bit.
Because I think when I first started, I was playing Gibson, just the celluloid picks, because I was at school. I was poor, and I wanted something with a Gibson logo on, so I was at least I could buy Gibson picks. And it was quite soon after that I switched to the Delrin. Was that point 96? The 0.96, yeah. And I loved those. And just got loads and loads and loads, and they lasted me for years. And it was only probably about 10 years or so ago. I was at a guitar show, and it was the Timbertones rep, gave me this one is Burmese teak. So it's a little bit different. And then that was like my gateway drug into there's other picks. There's the Timbertones website, and you say there's stone. So I've got some horn and bone, and I really like the carbon fibre ones. I was really getting on with the carbon fibre. Then I read something about carbon fibre dust as like one of the worst things you can get into your lungs, and I thought it's probably a tiny amount, but I'm paranoid enough that's going back on the shelf, and I'm going to have a look for something else.
It is a shame. There's a couple of guys making from carbon fibre. The big guy that I've come across outside of Timbertones is Andreas R at Wharf Shop in Lithuania. He makes exclusively from carbon fibre, but he started blending it with things like bronze, and those picks are brutal, man. Like, really, it's a very aggressive, very straight-faced sort of sound. It doesn't have a lot of give in it. I mean, so even hard materials like PSU and U-glass can still have give in the tone, like a certain grace to it, but carbon fibre's like just comes out like a big brick wall. The other one you got to watch out for is Peak polyether ether ketone, which is it's got like little bits of glass in it, like glass dust, and when you play that, it sheds everywhere. So Peak's a good material for picks, but don't breathe it in.
Because it's probably about 6 or 7 months ago, I got into gravity. I finally got around to trying out the gravity picks. Tried a few different shapes and sizes, and kind of settled on the Razor now. I think it's just a lovely. It feels right. It's got the right sort of feel for me. And just started evangelising them to all of my friends. And one guy got me, he says, "Oh, I love them," and he got the ones with the unpolished edge, and I just couldn't get on with the unpolished edge. He says, "Oh, that's such a lovely playing experience," but for me, I like something smooth that just glides off the string. I just couldn't believe how much he hated the polished edge and how much I just couldn't get on with the rough.
It is very interesting, because both those things with acrylic, particularly, you tend to find this, is that there's two companies principally that you'll probably come if you get into the Plectroverse, dear viewer. The two companies that you'll come across most likely in terms of acrylic, two of the biggest names, is Gravity and VPix. Both of them do a variant on what's called the master polish or the ghost buffed edge, which is that the surface is polished and then the edges are unfinished, essentially. Now, I've kind of fallen into both camps with this. It depends on the pick. there are models that I think are better with that rough edge, and also the polish thing. But it depends. On acoustic, I would always use the rough edge. The reason being that the polished edge is very chirpy, and when we talk about chirp in the pick community, it's that sound of a kind of bling 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 when you hit the plain strings, because all of that surface, the edge of the pick has to make contact with the string and move through it. So when you're playing hard, you probably won't notice it. If you were doing trem picking on the high strings and you're like that, you'll definitely hear it. And the worst time to hear it is when you play slowly. If you go like that real country sort of slow jump sort of swing, almost waltz feel, you'll really notice it coming through there. In which case, I would always say use the Ghost Buffed or Master Polished Edge. But there's also a thing to be said, if you're noticing it playing this way around and your pick is a classic teardrop shape, you don't have to use the tip. It's very common in jazz for guys to turn them round and use the blunt bit at the top, because that's in the old gypsy style. If you watch guys like Django and all that, their picks were almost circular, because they're playing, that style is to play almost exclusively on the downbeat and only do alternate, like when you're doing chords, jack, 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 jang, jack, sort of thing. When you're you only use alternate picking when you're doing lead work. So it's so they would go for these sort of almost circular picks, like coat buttons almost. But it's again, some guy somewhere like your pal is going, yes, I found my thing, whereas you're like, I don't know, and it's just like guitars, isn't it? Some guy saying, oh, I would never play this, I would never play that, it's a hound, and then somebody else is rolling in broken glass trying to get their hands on it, and it's just that's just the way our community is, and it's worth remembering that because that's the case, like the fact that there's no, if we are truly objective about it, the fact that there's no good or bad music, which I genuinely believe, there's only stuff you're into and stuff you're not into. There's loads of bands that are impossibly successful, who I won't name, so I'm not about the hate, but loads of bands who are really, really big that I don't listen to, but I circumnavigate this issue by not listening to them. It doesn't mean they haven't got their place. It doesn't mean they can't set off a festival crowd like this. It's just, it's not my thing. Picks are the same, guitars are the same, it's all the same,
So you've obviously spent a lot of time researching picks and finding what you like, what you don't like. So what was your journey? I guess you started with something relatively simple like the nylons and celluloids, and then it all just go from there.
I can, the thing is, when I started playing in '95, and I'd never given any thought to this. I mean, it just wasn't a thing, But I started off with the Dunlop Tortex 60s, orange ones, and then I played those until I found the 71, which is the pink one, the .71 500 series, which is also Delrin but polished. And then I was playing those, and my picks kept getting harder, and I needed a sharper tip. And this wasn't a conscious decision. This was just something that I was like, well, I feel like it's dragging. Everything's dragging behind. I'm not a shreddy player. I've always been a rhythm player. But I tried the Dunlop the Wedge, which is your 351, but it's instead of being I've got one, but it's in a massive bowl downstairs. So that's your normal 351 shape, but the wedge is a little bit wider at the top and it's more pointed at the bottom, so it's got like a Jazz 3's
so
bottom.
perfectly standard.
Yeah. For the sake of argument, yes. But be that as it may, I tried the wedge ones at 1mm and I was like, I feel like I'm kind of getting there. And then the thing that really changed was I got into, when I was working in London, I got my hands on an Altex XL, the yellow Ghost, as I refer to it, which I've got somewhere, and that was the first pick I played that had no give in it whatsoever, like nothing. And I was doing a lot of instrumental stuff at the time, like loads of live looping, and I couldn't believe the amount of power I had. Like it's still, I know it today to be a little bit of a, it's a bit of a, sledgehammer job, but at the time it was really eye opening. I couldn't, because I was playing so much on my own. I'm very, very used to the sound of my guitar going through the same amp with the same gear. This is before I was using compression or anything like that, so there was nothing to get in the way of the raw dynamics, as it were. I was playing through the same amp all the time, which is an old 70s Wem Westminster, which I've still got over here. But that familiarity meant that when something fundamental changed, I really did notice it. So it was the Altex XL, and then Gravity, 2mm Gravity Sunrise, because I started researching it a little bit online. This is about 5-6 years ago. And then a guy who was a pit band player, because we used to get a lot of guys through from who played in the pit bands and theatres. He came through and he said, "Oh, you've got a Gravity. Have you tried V-Picks?" And this is before I really knew that was I'm still relatively new to the whole thing. So he says, "Try this V-Picks out," and it was a Tradition Light, and I was like, "Oh, right, okay, so this is the same material, but it's thinner and it's more pointed, blah blah." And then I get into the Dragonheart thing, and then after that, it was a case of, this is when I started using Instagram, which is a big thing, because every subsect of music has its own little community. There's all these pedal boards of doom and modern guitarists and everything that are sort of open forums on Facebook, where I guess they would have been on message boards before, but they were all on Facebook. The pit community, for the most part, although they have Facebook pages, tend to be on Instagram. Just because it's an easier place to showcase your work, and you're dealing in quite small squares. It's all on your mobile, and so it's easy for somebody to put the focus on a small object, and you're talking to each other. You're able to see somebody else with a very similar interest without having to strap on a miner's helmet and crash your way through Pinterest, which is just like like this. But I started finding out about guys like Wharf Shop was one of the earliest. I have to say, guys like Brian Stable at Howling Monkey, Patrick Huffschmidt at Huffschmidt Plectrums, Brock Little at BHL, Matt Halliday at Stone Age was one of the earliest guys I got into. Alexis Rodeo at Iron Age Picks, and Eppo Franken at Chicken Picks. He was a big guy, because I was able to see some of those in shops. And the more, it's like any hobby or any passion you get into, the more you kind of lean in, the deeper you find out that it goes. Anybody who's into pedals, even casually, will be fully aware of this. I want to buy a fuzz, and it's just even if you narrow it down by country, the number of builders is mental. But I was fascinated by some of the people I saw. Once you move outside of the norm, and there was people like, and there have been a lot of companies spring up in the last year, which is really exciting. But people like Tom Winspear, Rob at Hawk, people like Ricky LaPlectry. Ricky was the first guy that I saw, and I was like, I'm not even scratching the surface of this thing. Like anybody that's interested in it, even if you're not interested in the tonal side of it, you just are interested in the aesthesis, go and have a look at Ricky LaPlectry, man. That guy is in a different realm. Like he's making functional picks, right, which is cool, but he makes a lot of pieces pushing the form of what's possible inside the Plectrum. And he did a whole range which have they're made from, the casings are titanium. I mean, there's still picks you can use, right? But it's titanium on the outside, and you've got this like a scene on the inside made out of like watch cogs and all sorts of stuff. It is wild. That's that's really exciting. And so today it's like, I don't know, maybe in my collection, because my collection's a working collection. It's not, I don't collect, I'm still interested in vintage picks, but I don't collect them because they're picks that you have for collection and display. But I know that if I need to get into any of my stuff and use it, it's a viable thing to use. So the I don't know, probably 100 plus companies, and I'm only kind of starting to put a dent in it.
Yeah, there was there's a video that you did where you were laying your collection out, and it was like, well, do I do them by manufacturer, do them by colour or size? It was like all over the floor. I imagine the collection's expanded quite a bit since you did that video, because your channel, you just constantly, I've got this pick, and all these ones that you acquired, and they all seem to have something different about them as well.
Well, the funny thing is that the more, and I will say this, genuinely putting my flag in the ground, which is not something that the rep wants to do in these volatile times, but the one thing I will say is that to date, this is the best in all my years of playing and all that. The Plectruverse is the kindest, most supportive community I've ever come across. I have very rare, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, that would be foolish, but I've very rarely seen people get into it with one another. One of the things you find is a lot of builders buy from each other, and they'll say, oh mate, I can't, but look what you've done with that material, look what you've done with this, look at that shape, look at those curves, how are you doing that? How do I, if I'm shipping, things, simple stuff, if I'm shipping outside of the US, how do I make sure that my shipping is competitive and I'm not charging £40 for the, you know what I mean? But the upshot of that is that I started to get, and when I knew that this was, and it's a hard thing to accept, as musicians, I'm generally of the belief, if I may be serious, Roman, I'm generally of the belief that very few people get into music because they're okay. And as musicians, it's very hard, it's very easy for us to be hard on ourselves. We are our own worst critics and all that sort of stuff. But it's very difficult to deny the facts of certain things. There's a wall just over here, you'll see it on my gram, whatever, but there's a wall over here of letters that I've had from all over the world, from different people, saying, thanks for what you're doing, here's some picks that I had, or here's some stuff from my collection. I got one today, here's some stuff from my collection that I just thought, I'll send it to you, because why the hell not? And all these are all from a maker called Tibor, who is a German lad. He makes Plectrum Plectrums, which are these ones here, you probably won't be able to see on the camera, but he uses a plant-based copolymer, so his picks are biodegradable, which is that's the first one I've come across. There wasn't a naturally occurring thing like coconut shell or whatever. And so every now and again I'll get a bag of picks from somebody. There's a lad in the States called Eric, and Eric periodically sends me a bag with about 100 picks in, just because he's a collector as well. But he collects all sorts of stuff. He's not collecting, he collects modern stuff as well, but and I've got, because of that, I've got things like Moshe's, which are old nylon picks, really, really cool. And I think the collection now is, it's got to be pushing 1,000 if it's not more. But I would like to put this in context for those of you watching at home. If you want to see, I'm a collector, but I'm a working collector, right? So all the stuff that I use, like I say, I can choose these, I can go and gig with them, and with a few exceptions, like the specific one-off stuff, I can go to a company like your Gravities, your V-Picks, your Chicken Picks, your Stone Age, to a certain extent, and if a pick gets lost, which is a terrifying experience for me, but if a pick gets lost or it gets destroyed or you give it to somebody and somebody nicks it, which happens all the time, not to me, because I always ask for my picks back, but if that happens, I can go to the company and buy them again. With vintage collectors, that's not the case. So if you really want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, go onto YouTube and look for a guy called Joe Macy, Macey. Joe Macy is the alpha of pick collecting. That guy's collection, oh man. I interviewed a lad called Guy DeVilles, who's also a big name in vintage pick collecting, and those guys aren't in the thousands; they're in the tens of thousands. Joe Macy's collection, I think, at one point was well past 60,000, and this is stuff like. This isn't stuff like, oh, I've got a Stevie Ray Vaughan pick from the 80s that he threw, you know that sort of thing. It's like going back pre-First World War and getting the earliest D'Andreas, Herdums, like Clown Tears as they're called, which are the Fender mottled black, red and white and blue ones, French mosaics, like all this really hardcore stuff that generally you only see in books. And mine's pretty big now. I've had to get, relatively speaking, I'm not in that sort of area, but for practical purposes, I've got a Jim Dunlop shop display in this room. It's just here actually, and then 2 full toolboxes on top of that, and a row of jewellery cases, these little things. Those are full of picks as well. I've got 12 of them, and I'm looking for doing some travelling interviews I'll be doing later in the year. I'm trying to get one of those fold out toolbox jobs, because it's easier to put more stuff in, and it looks kind of fancy. Everything's covered in stickers from everywhere. A lot of makers send you stickers, and I really like that, because it's part of our culture. It's part of guitar. Your guitar case covered in AAAs, from all the toilet venues you went and played. But the thing is, as much as it's very easy for us to disparage such things in a sort of jovial way, these are literally the things that keep our industry going. It's a financially ruinous, emotionally difficult time vortex, where you can pump thousands and thousands of pounds into it, and all of your time, and never see any return. But that's kind of not the point of the exercise. And all of this stuff has meaning that we ascribe to it. But I will say that I've taken my collection out with me. This toolbox I've got here, this one's got loads of stickers on all this. But I remember I was doing a little photo shoot when I was doing my radio show one night, and I took my box of picks to the pub with me after. I was meeting some pals there, and a couple of them are players, but they're kind of like, meh, your picks, whatever. And 2 minutes after, you open the lid and they're all in there. Even if they don't play, they're in there. Go, oh, what's that? And what's this thing? And what's that thing? And what's this thing? Because we like, as a species, we like minutiae. We like stuff that's unique and exciting and colourful. And even if you're getting excited about it for that reason, I'm into it. Why not? There's no bad reason to get excited about something, especially if you yourself are then excited about it. And if they ask, what's this and what's it made from, where did it come from, I can tell them. And if someone's excited, then that's literally the point of the rep, at the very least.
Yeah, and I guess if you pick up, no pun intended, something which you haven't played before, and it's one of your, like 6 mil thick, you're going to approach the guitar differently. That's going to cause you to create something different. Your picking style will be different, and suddenly you're writing a riff and the phrasing's completely not you, because this is like a gateway to something else in the creative process, which is what it's all about. It's about creating music. It's not It's about just collecting stuff.
Yeah, it's like changing in the most macrocosmic way. It's like changing if you always play an overdrive, swap it for a fuzz. There's loads of stuff that you can't do. There's loads of stuff you can do that you can't do with a drive, but it will make you come at that riff differently. It will make you come at that section, that bridge, that integration differently. It changes where you sit in the band, and that's really important.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing as well is just how relatively cheap or low cost a pick is compared to an overdrive pedal. Because you might say, okay, I want to get away from just using my drive pedal. I'm going to go out and buy a fuzz face or a big muff or something. That's £100 plus. You even for like a slightly dodgy second-hand one. For £1, I can get a reasonably interesting pick that might give me that same inspiration.
It does get. I'm not going to lie. For those of you who are watching this and thinking, I bet this gets really expensive, it does, but when you are looking at it through, like anything, if you collect and watches or Magic the Gathering cards, or you collect like old pictures or something, or old cameras that need weird film, any hobby's expensive. I guess my argument would be, if you're into it, buy the picks. If you're, nobody's making you do it. But at the same time, there's been a couple of instances where I've dropped. I think about. What's the most I've ever chucked at it? Probably about 40 quid. But that was for a pretty serious. But I had to know it was for a Huffschmidt. It's for a Huffschmidt Ergo Anvil, and I had to know what the chat was. And actually, I've come across builders since that are more expensive than him. But at the same time, it's all relative, I don't have any problem shelling out. For example, to use one prescient modern example, I've got no problem at all shelling out for Matt Halliday's stuff from Stone Age, and the reason is because I know I've spoken to Matt a lot. This isn't one of those before it was cool things, but I spoke to Matt about a year and a half ago when I was just getting into this, and he was still working full time in a shop doing Stone Age on the top of that, which is also a full-time gig, and he does it all. For those of you who are watching, most of these guys, with one or two notable exceptions like Chicken Picks and V-Picks, they're all doing it on their own. So when you send a message to somebody like Plectrum's Handcrafted or Metapix or like Pigstrom or Rock Hard or any of these guys, maybe not Rock Hard because they're a division of an aerospace company, but Raptor or T1 or Savage Customs, it's a guy sat somewhere with a file and maybe a laser cutter making stuff, but they still have to physically finish each plectrum at the very bare minimum. They're still having to sit down with a file and go, or use a sander against it. And one thing that really opened my eyes with it and makes you realise how important this stuff is when it comes to the money side, because everybody understands the money in the music game, right? So they look at a guitar and go, it's $5,000. I bet it's really good. That's not how this works. So it's perfectly viable for you to pick up a guitar at 5,000 quid and not get on with it. Does that mean you're wrong? No. It just means you didn't get on with the guitar. So that doesn't take away from any of the craft that went into it. And I'm putting out a video, maybe it'll be out by the time this is out, I don't know. But I'm putting out a video that I'm doing with my friend Dan over at Arcanum Plectra. Dan makes his, I've known Dan for a long time, and he makes his picks in Exeter by hand, out of acrylic. I have watched the guy make a pick from beginning to end with almost no serious machinery. So he's not cutting with a laser cutter. He's cutting the picks out as blanks by hand, shaving them on a grinder in his garden because he hasn't got a shed. So he's he's cutting the raw parts with a bandsaw, shaving it on a grinder, then taking it inside, shaving down the bevels with a file, taking them back out to the grinder just to buff them out, then taking them back inside and going through 8 sheets of wet dry paper to give you your pick that you bought for £7. That's one pick done by one guy. So when you're going to a small maker, as it is with all the things, when you go to a company like Tate Effects and you get a fuzz, Stuart has sat down and made that pedal. It's not coming out of it's not like coming out of a press. You don't just sling a bit of, well, that's not true. I was going to say you don't sling a bit of Delrin and it comes out of a press. That's actually how Delrin works. But as soon as you get into the small companies, if they're making from anything that isn't injection molded, it's a guy making picks.
Yeah. So you might think that's £7 for a pick. So you're saying £7 for a pick, but once you take out his materials and the cost of his tools, he's getting less than minimum wage for the amount of time he's having to spend finishing every edge. So really, it's actually quite cheap for what work goes into it.
If we start to really, if you actually think about where your stuff is coming from, guitar, and I will say this to the community as a whole, guitarists, especially guitarists, you have no idea how lucky you are. Honestly, if you really want to scare the crap out of yourself, go online and see if you can find, if you want to join, say, a half decent orchestra, right, which is the equivalent of, or you want to get into a string quartet, or you want to play any instrument other than the guitar or the bass, maybe the violin, you're not going in at saying, oh, I'm just looking for a kickabout for a festival for £100. That's not a thing. It's like if you want to get into the woodwind section or brass, you need to get shot of a lung if you want to get in there. We don't know. It's actually it's one of, in my opinion, the ukulele accepted, it's one of the cheapest instruments, gigging instruments to get into. And actually, if the final part of your journey towards what you were trying to say and the tone you were trying to accomplish costs you £15 instead of 80p, it's worth that £15.
Yeah. So you've mentioned lots of names and like different factors that are part of the pick's characteristics. So if someone's been watching this and they're inspired and think, okay, I want to dip my toe in the water. All I've been playing so far is like, the standard stuff, the Tortexes, the celluloid. What would be a good starting point for someone who wants to experiment and get themselves into the Plectroverse a little bit more?
Well, first of all, if that is the case, welcome to the Plectroverse. You are always welcome here. Secondly, what I would say is you don't have to wade deep into the water. I'm not saying, if you can if you want to, but what you will find is if you have been playing, let's say we use your analogy, someone's been playing a Tortex, say like a 73 or an 88, the yellow and green one, right? Most common picks in the world. Let's say you want to see what else is out there. Best advice I can give you, and there's a lot of detail to this, but I'm not going to go into that now unless you want me to, which I'm more than happy to. But the easiest way to do it is you don't have to go boutique straight away. I would suggest if you're an electric player and you want to see a pick that is a little thicker, because most of the companies that make higher up the chain, they're making thicker plectrums, because the thicker you go, the more tonal benefits you get and the easier it is to bevel. Start with something like Dunlop Primetone series or the Dunlop Flows, just to get used to a different shape, because those are pretty cheap. It's actually cheaper to buy a bag of 12 Dunlop Flows than it is to buy a bag of 351s. Only by about 20p, but 20p is 20p. If you want to see what else is out there in terms of machine-made stuff, I'd recommend that you start with a company like Swiss Picks. Pete Punkowski at Swiss Picks makes some rad gear. Ones I would look out for to get just to ease you in a little bit is Swiss Picks Rusty Coulee Nuclear Cheddar, which is made from polycarbonate. Comes in a variety of thicknesses. Slab is their thickest at 2mm. It's superb. If you want to go deeper than that, then you could get into V-Picks or Gravity is the most common type because you'll actually see them in shops. Chicken picks are sold all over the place. You've also got stuff like Iron Age. You've got Fellow Plectrums out of Australia. He does Delrin up to about 2mm in really good shapes. You've got Assetti picks in Italy if you want something a bit unusual. If you're a gypsy player, oh man, if you're a gypsy player, you're already deep in this. So just just cut out the middleman. Cut out the middleman and go straight to companies like Dugan or Wagon. The Wagon Trimus 250, and that's one of their thinner ones, is the most explosive pick I've ever played. Like joke powerful. Stupid thing. Amazing. There's companies like Superbite. Those of you who are strummers, I would suggest having a look at companies like Gem, who make the picks from PVC. You've got Days Atomic, you've got Bog Street, Windspear, especially if you are what we call at the shop a cow chaser, which is somebody that plays progressive tech death because it goes cacao, cow, 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 cacao, cow. Then Windspear immediately. Stone Age, categorically Stone Age. That's when you're in. By the time you hit Stone Age, you're in there, because his picks are made from agate. So and the workmanship is beautiful. No two are the same because they're made from stone. They are genuine one-offs, and as long as you are not a clown and batter your gear around like an idiot, then they're not going to tear through your strings any faster than anything else. And also, if you don't rattle your pickups all the time, then you might get, you could get 20 or 30 years out of that pick, because stone doesn't wear down. It really is, it's infinite. If you want a good list of where to start, you can, if you go to the website heavyripping.com, there's a post called The Big List, which is taped to the top, and that's a list of every company I've ever dealt with, and a little description thereof and one recommendation. So if it sounds like something you'd be into, give it a rattle.
Something I noticed about your website is you do go into a lot of detail on the reviews. So like to the untrained eye, you think, okay, this is a pick. It's a little bit thinner than some. It feels quite comfortable in the hand. Thank you very much. But you've got paragraphs and paragraphs, and like you say, you've got this list of hundreds of people that you've dealt with, and you've got recommendations from them also. That's quite a valuable resource if someone's wanting to get into the Plectrumverse. Yeah.
Well, it's because it's like guitars. If somebody says, say your pal, right? We're both players, yeah. So let's say your pal phones up and says, "I've got a budget of X." Say they've got a completely normal budget for the electric guitar, which is say about 400 quid, right? For a second-hand mid-priced electric, and they don't want to do, say, if we rule out the two areas where you have to have, in my opinion, you have to have relatively specific tools for a job, which is gypsy jazz and extreme metal, because in both those things you have to have specific tools, because you're going for a very pointed tonality. Everything else you can make, and I have found throughout the years, anything else you can make work for you. You can take a telly and do heavy stuff. You can do country with a Les Paul if you want to. There's no reason you can't, because if you like the guitar, you'll make it work for you, right? So the principle is, your pal phones up and says, "I've got 400 quid. What do I get?" Now, the easy answer is to say you buy Mexican Strat and then you figure it out from there, which is what most people do when they've got 400 quid. But you're not going to do that. You're going to say to them, well, these are the sort of pickups. At the bare minimum, you're going to say, this is the sort of pickups. Do you want a trem? Do you want to, what style do you want to do? How big a neck do you want? Do you want to be doing loads of bending? Do you want to play chords? Do you want to do this? So it's not a case of saying, as with any piece of equipment. And overdrive is not just on, bang, here we go. How does it integrate with which amp? Where do I put it in my signal path? Do I need to have this to get the most out of it? If I have this characteristic and I want to run it like that, how will it work? If I back my volume off, how does the pedal clean up? Can I use this delay in this fashion? What's the taper if I decide to go for analog delay? I thought there was no point whatsoever in an industry where minutiae is tacitly celebrated for me to go in and say, this pick is made from nylon, and leave it at that. If I were to be dramatic, it's a little bit unfair on the maker, because if you go into a library, I use the library analogy a lot in this, but if you go into a library and you see, treat the guitar or the Plectroverse as a library, and let's say somebody says to me, which I get quite often, I've played Dunlop gels for 20 years, always have, always will, which is a byword for saying I've never tried anything else. And you think of that pick as a book, right? So you walk into a library, it's got 200,000, 300,000 books in it, and you take one book out over and over and over again. What are you missing out on? And why, more importantly, given the question posed, why should you not go and read some of the other books? The reason is simple. Somebody goes into that much detail, and I care very much about this, so somebody goes into that much detail and shows that they care and they speak with confidence on a topic, not because they are selling something, but because they're trying to get you to find something that will change the way you integrate with your instrument. It's important. It's crucial. And some stuff I've found, the reason why I go into so much detail is because some stuff that I have found, and the Prodigy Mini we talked about earlier on, pre-filming the video, is a perfect example. When I tried that in guitar, didn't like it. I just didn't like it. Then when I tried it on a smaller instrument, mandolin, which I tried it at work, and a tenor guitar and the dulcimer, it was great. But if I just tried it on guitar, not into that at all. It's way too small, and the Jazz 3 knocked into a cocked hat. But when I switched instruments, the roles were reversed. So if I hadn't done that, somebody somewhere would have gone, oh, never mind. Because it's not just, the thing with the picks thing is, it's not just guitarists. It's people who play tenor banjo, it's people who play the mandolin, it's dulcimer players, uke players, bass players even. I know that's illegal, but bass players all the same. And so if I really break it down to brass tacks, it is the closest, I try at least, to make it the closest you can get to how the pick is without you trying it out. Because until you have it in your hands, you can go and watch all the YouTube videos you like, and I count my own YouTube videos as part of this. You want to find out what a pedal is like, you want to find out what a guitar is like or an amp is like, you go to your shop and you test it. Until you've got it in your hands and you're running, pedals especially, if you want to know what a pedal is like, go to your local shop, test it out through an amp that's as close to what you've got as possible, with your own guitar preferably, then you've got a fighting chance of knowing what it's like. But until you integrate it into your actual setup, you've no idea what it sounds like. All you can ever go on is character and subtlety. Fuzz is the worst. If you take a fuzz from one amp to the other, and in one it sounds like you're playing in a bucket, and the other one it sounds unbelievable, there's no way for you to know that until you're there in person. Picks is the same because it's tactile, but I try and do as much as I can to give people as much information as they can, because a lot of these picks, though I'm looking forward to changing this in the future, a lot of these picks you have to buy over the internet. Because shops aren't going to take, from a shop perspective, I completely understand this, you're not going to take a punt on a pick that costs 15 quid, because something else can go in that space that will turn over all the time. So if you give people an opportunity to know what something is like as much as you can, so they can buy it blind off the internet, that's all you can ask.
I think we're probably coming up for about time, so before I sign off, do you want to do some gratuitous plugs for your website, your YouTube, Instagram and whatnot?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. So if you want to know anything about any of this, I am always open. It's all times of the day or night, apparently, for questions. What do you think of this, or have you thought about doing this, or just general internet sort of activity. I had a guy ask me for the recipe for my sandwich today because I posted a sandwich in my story, so if you want to do that, that's cool, but you can go to www.heavyrepping.com. Oh, excuse me. You can also go on Instagram at heavyrepping. It's the same on Facebook and Twitter. I try and publish at least at least 2 to 3 articles a week on different things, reviewing individual picks, whatever. The YouTube videos go up when I can make them. It used to be once a week, but life, so it's now once every 2 weeks. I have a video coming up very soon with Nads from Arcanum Plectrum showing us his process and talking about how he got into the Plectraverse. There's also some stuff coming up about sustainable materials in the pit community. I do a series called The Science, explaining what the materials are that you use, where they came from, how they came to be and how they work. And I will be at various guitar shows over the course of this year, partly because I'm working them, but also because I'm trying to get out and meet more people face to face. So if there's something I've missed or anything like that, and there's a lot of pit companies out there, please let me know. I always want to find out about new stuff. And thanks very much for showing an interest.
Okay, well, thanks very much for joining me. It's always good to talk to somebody who's so passionate about the subject. You are such an evangelist. You can tell there's a real passion there, and hopefully some people have been watching this get inspired, and they'll go out and just see what they can do and change their playing experience. Okay, so
excellent. Well, thanks very much, man. Cheers.
Okay, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please click like down there. If you enjoyed it, you want to see other things that I post onto the PhatPhish channel, I'm going to try and do some more collaborative stuff. I think it's quite good fun. And then please click subscribe, also down there. If you want to pitch in on the conversation as well, you're more than welcome to join in the comments section. But if you've got something specific that you want to ask me, whether it's about guitar equipment, playing guitar, music theory, anything like suggestions for future videos or anything like that, better off going here. Fill that form in and your comment, question, whatever will come direct to me. So thanks again to John for joining me for that little collab, and please spend a bit of time over at heavyrepping.com and just the amount of work that goes into that website for Plectrum reviews and so on. It's worth a bit of your time. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video sometime soon. Bye for now.